Tonight, the accused murderer is now the convicted Creighton killer, guilty of 2 murders in 2008 and 2 more in 2013, all in the name of revenge.
The jury deliberated only 7 hours before convicting the man whose time in the Creighton Pathology Department ended with his firing in 2001. He returned to Omaha with a vengeance.
This person is obviously a serial killer, and he's going to kill again. If we don't stop him, somebody else is going to die. From the historic, haunted heartland of Omaha, Nebraska, my name is Brian Corey, and it is my pleasure to welcome you and you and you to this episode of Necronomicast. I'm back in Omaha, back in Nebraska, telling stories of my home state and of my hometown. For tonight's episode, my guest for a late night conversation is Henry J. Cordes. He's an award-winning journalist here in Omaha. He's written several nonfiction books documenting stories in his native state. Now, he's written a real page-turner with Pathological. It tells the true story of a doctor turned serial killer, his thirst for revenge, and of the determined detectives who stopped him just before he killed again. Henry J. Cordes, senior staff writer for the Omaha World-Herald. And now calling in on the Necronomicast hotline, I've got him here from the historic haunted heartland of Omaha, down the road from me, I suspect. Longtime Omaha World-Herald reporter and writer Henry J. Cordes. Henry, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. Good to see you, Brent.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you. It's not very often that I get to have a hometown Omaha guy on the show, so welcome.
Right. We have our crimes too, here in good old Nebraska.
I know. Usually you think Omaha, and it is. I'm an Omaha guy. Were you born in Omaha?
I wasn't, but I've been here for most of my life.
Okay. Well, I'm an Omaha guy. Been here all my life, except for vacations and for years down at UNL down in Lincoln. But Omaha is pretty safe. We have our kind of our share of murders here. They're mostly, I don't know what you'd say, like domestic disputes or gang violence, targeted, random. So this was really a departure from the norm of what we're accustomed to here.
And it was one that really shocked the city. It really did. I live in the Dundee neighborhood where this occurred, and I can tell you the feeling in the neighborhood at that time was pretty palpable.
Yeah, I have some connections to the locations and whatnot, some people involved, just because we're Omaha guys. So you've worked for the World-Herald, which is the Omaha paper for people that are not from around here. The Omaha World-Heralds are a long time newspaper. So you've been working with them for a long time.
I have more than 40 years. I really literally started right out of high school in the sports department and moved to news and just have done a variety of stuff. Do not, frankly, usually do a lot of crime stuff. But again, this one, the initial crimes took place right in my neighborhood. So I got involved because I knew a lot of people that lived kind of in that general vicinity. And then it just became such a sensational case that I essentially got pulled into it.
Yeah. So let's kind of get into it a little bit because, like I said, I've been here my whole life and we don't have, thankfully, very many serial killers here. When I was a little boy in the 80s, we had John Joubert, the airman from Bellevue, well, originally from back west, Portland area, but came here because of the Air Force and kidnapped some young boys and murdered them. So he was a serial killer, terrified me and all my friends and the whole community back in the early 80s. But we'd have to go into 2008 to really talk about another so-called or another serial killer here in Omaha. And those crimes that occurred in 2008, we as a community didn't know that it was a serial killer at first.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to set the scene. So kind of what happened was that in March, a doctor just returned home, and his wife was also a doctor. They both worked at Creighton University, which is one of the 2 academic medical centers here in Omaha, and came home and was just kind of stunned to find their house cleaner, who usually came on Wednesdays, was dead down on the hallway right in front of him where he entered the back door. Immediately went into a panic, went looking for his son, who he knew would have come home from school a couple hours earlier. Originally went to the basement where he heard the video game that his son would typically play when he came home from school, and the game was on, and as if his son had walked away from it, but he was not there. And he kind of raced through the rest of the house, and he found his son's body in the dining room. And like Shirley Sherman, the housekeeper, so 11-year-old Tommy Hunter, they were both down on the floor. Both of them had been stabbed repeatedly on the right side of the neck with a knife. Both knives had been taken right from the home. And even more kind of chillingly, both of them, the knives were left in their necks by the killer.
Yeah. So I remember when, it was breaking news in 2008, like all the news stations covered it right away. The World-Herald, channel 3, 6, 7, everybody broke in because, like you said, you live not too far from where this happened. And that's it's a very safe, beautiful part of town, very historic, old houses. I'm sure your house is close to 100 years old. If you live down there, it's just such it's a nice part of town, very pristine, historic. So these kinds of brutal events certainly do not happen in that part of town for sure.
No, and to give people some, everyone outside of Omaha has probably heard of Warren Buffett. I mean, Warren Buffett lives about 6 blocks from where these killings occurred. Maybe not even that. Maybe it's even closer to 4 blocks. Very close. So yeah, and originally the police didn't say a whole lot about it. And frankly, police did not have a lot to go on. There were immediately, both we as reporters and the police picked up on reports that about 2 hours before Dr. Hunter had gotten home, maybe there had been an individual who was seen driving up the street in a silver SRV, like he was looking for an address. He had kind of driven around the corner and parked, got out, and he was an olive-skinned man, kind of looking somewhat professional, wearing a suit jacket, no tie, carrying a briefcase, maybe kind of looked like a businessman or salesman, and proceeded to walk very calmly to the Hunter home, knocked on the front door, apparently was admitted for some reason by either Tommy or Shirley. I tend to think it was Tommy. There were reports it was Shirley, but Tommy kind of had a little mop of hair of his own. I tend to think it was Tommy. And then about half hour later, he was seen just as calmly walking back to his car and getting back into the car, which had non-Nebraska license plates. No one really saw what state it was, but that they had seen enough to know that it was not a Nebraska plate, and drove off. And that is really literally all they had to go on at the time.
Right. So we didn't know if this was, a traveling salesman or some kind of insurance agent or somebody. We had no idea. And the brutality of the crime, you mentioned earlier that the knives were still placed in, still sticking in their necks. We later knew that they were kind of placed in there with some precision because this person knew what they were doing.
They did not even really disclose the cause of death. I mean, all we knew is that there was, I think we knew that maybe they were stabbed, but the exact implications, how exactly they had been killed. What we really just knew was that there was an 11-year-old boy and a 57-year-old grandmother who were dead, and nobody knew why. And that also, frankly, was part of the problem that really inhibited the initial investigation. Nobody really knew who the intended victim was here. I mean, so it led to a lot of different theories. I mean, the Shirley, the housekeeper, a very nice person, but she did have some kind of people in her family who had been associated with drugs. And so that was an initial thought and theory that was kind of pretty vigorously pursued and latched on to by the police. Tommy played online video games with people from all over the country, even all over the world. And could he have been the intended victim, that it was somebody who was stalking him, on his video game? And then you had both of the hunters. They were both physicians. They both, dealt with patients. And in some cases, in the case of Mrs. Hunter, she was a cardiologist who dealt with, hundreds of patients over the years. And Dr. Hunter was a pathologist, so he tended to not deal directly with as many patients. Pathologists tend to kind of examine the reports that other doctors and consult. But still, there were any number of people who could have been angry at them over the course of their work, and really they kind of pursued all of those angles, and for a number of reasons, including, as we would later learn, one mistake that was made. They never were able to come up with a credible suspect in those killings.
Yeah, and for all us armchair detectives who think we know what we're doing and think we know facts, we look at, like you said earlier, like 11-year-old Tommy Hunter. 2008, this was kind of the beginning of internet, gaming in terms of being able to connect with people all over the place. And you don't know if he was being targeted. Like you said, a perpetrator was trying to inflict harm on him and didn't know that the housekeeper was going to be there, because Tom was a latchkey kid, and you didn't know if Shirley Sherman, the housekeeper, who, her daughter was in a bad relationship at a time, and Shirley was a wonderful, caring woman. She took care of her elderly mom. She was a single mom herself, but you never know if she might have gotten somebody mad at her because of things out of her control. You don't know if it's a botched robbery and the robber freaked out and left because the detectives came in and they noticed like things weren't stolen. The video game system wasn't stolen. The nice things in the doctor's home wasn't stolen. Shirley had like $800 still in her purse, untouched. So, and the weapons were from the house. So maybe it wasn't a planned murder. They just grabbed whatever they could. So the police walked in, and Detective Derek Moise.
Moise is the correct pronunciation, correct?
Right, Moise. I was thinking of the old athletic director, Moose. Derek Moise comes in, and that's how your book starts. And he kind of comes in and just comes upon this horrific scene. And even with his experience and everything that he's seen as an Omaha homicide detective, you're not ready for an 11-year-old corpse. You're not.
No, he had children of his own. So to just walk in and see this boy was kind of a gut punch for him. And we're talking, this is a detective who just months earlier we had a mass shooting event in Omaha at the Von Maur store, and he had been this is the whole reason he had been asked to work this crime scene, because that was one of the most complex homicide crime scenes we ever had in Omaha. There were 8 people killed in this mass shooting. He had been assigned to that case, and that was and I talked to him about both of those cases, and he said this one was as bad a crime scene as he had ever come upon, and that's saying a lot in the case of Derek Moise.
Yeah, for sure. So they come in. The police are going by, this eyewitness account of an olive-skinned man, a silver CRV, which is like a Honda SUV, kind of a split between a large SUV and a smaller one. Just, they don't have a ton to go by. I also read in your book that they said, maybe he stumbled around, could have been a crack in the sidewalk, or kind of maybe had a stumble outside. And so it was just really not a lot to go on. And these detectives exhausted just about every lead that they could. And they really did their due diligence throughout this investigation of trying to figure out who could have done such a horrible thing. And they just kept coming up empty-handed with a good suspect.
Right. The case went cold. mean, it absolutely went cold, and it would sit there for a number of years. Police said, we would always check with them now and then, and they would always say, "Oh, we got it. It's an active case." A tip would come in every now and then, and they would pursue it. They would say that the case never ever sat idle for months at a time, but there were always because it went from the regular homicide unit right to the cold case unit, and they continued to pick away at it. But even years later, there was nothing there.
One thing that I really appreciate about your book, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the name of it when I greeted you on the beginning of the program. It's called Pathological: The Murderous Rage of Dr. Anthony Garcia. One thing I really appreciate about your book, earlier I said that, how the book opens with the detective coming upon the crime scene and his reaction, his interpretation to the events. But you also do a really good job, and I think the best crime books do this, the true crime books, at least the ones that I enjoy, always do a good job of having insight into the victims, like really showing you, the loss of life. And you also do a great job of showing like the real hard work, the tenacity, the gumshoe detective work that these police officers went through for years trying to find out who this guy was. So I wanted to make sure I said that, because I think the best crime books are not the ones about the perpetrators as much as they are about the pursuit of justice.
Yeah, they were all just very interesting people, and both Shirley and Tommy were tragic losses. Tommy was a very, very smart kid. I mean, he would be in his 30s now. It's hard to imagine what he would be doing today. But he was very scientific, very inquisitive, very, very bright kid. He may have become a doctor like his parents. It's hard to say what he would have done. And Shirley, by all accounts, was just a darling person, and doted on her grandchild. And she'd lived a little bit of a hard life, but she was one who had always persevered through a lot of things. And they were both tragic losses. And I did get to know the detectives in this case very well, and just came to respect the heck out of them, and not only just how skilled they were, but how committed they were to their jobs.
Sure. So the police in this pursuit of the perpetrator, they go through all these leads, and they examine kind of like Shirley's daughter's boyfriend, and that kind of situation. There's alibis. There's no clear motive. There's just really nothing there. And then I thought it was interesting that they start going through like the associations of the doctor. And then they did surface the name of this Russian doctor, this mysterious Russian doctor.
Right.
Who they went after pretty hard. Like they really, really investigated this Russian doctor that was part of the pathology department, part of the Creighton team there, pretty hard, doggedly.
If there is anything that helped get the original investigation on the wrong track, it was the drug use in Shirley's family, and then there was the Russian doctor. Because whenever the cops would talk to people at Creighton about who could have done this, everyone mentioned the Russian doctor, who we didn't name in the book because he's completely innocent. He was a quirky guy, and he wasn't thought to be the nicest of guys, but he didn't kill anybody. And but at any time the detectives talked to people at Creighton, they were like, "It's that Russian. It's that Russian." The Russian was fingered for a couple of reasons. He had just very recently been in the Creighton pathology program. He had washed out of the program, and Dr. Hunter had worked very closely with him. But Dr. Hunter, and I talked to Dr. Hunter during this whole time. I had numerous conversations with him in the year or two after these killings, and because we were hearing rumors about the Russian, and he always told me he had no reason to be angry at me. Yes, he did wash out of our program, but I had helped land him in a good spot, and he was very happy about it. And he had landed on his feet, and we had parted on very good terms, but so many people in the pathology department kept saying to the police, check out the Russian. And they vetted him very strongly to the point of, getting he was in Pittsburgh. That was the job that Dr. Hunter had helped him land in. As a county court in the county coroner's office in Pittsburgh, and the police went so far as to pull all of his employment records, and they saw that he was working that day, and they even got to the point of, okay, but what work was he doing? What would he have had time? Did he have an actual autopsy scheduled that day, or could he have reported into work and left? They really drilled down into that level, and that it always came back that he had had an alibi, but he knew that they were interested in him, and he did have conversations with the police, and he's going to resurface again later, just when we get to the next set of crimes.
Yeah. So the case goes cold. All the leads, turn up nothing. As much as they have been trying to find connections between somebody in Shirley's past or her family associations and this mysterious Russian doctor, Anthony Garcia doesn't really come up at all. 5 years go by, and it's a cold case. And I just remember things like, when I was a little kid, I mentioned the Drew murders. There was there was a boy that was missing, Ricky Chaddock from 1986.
Right.
They never found out what happened to him. And so that's just another cold case. And I was, every once in a while you hear about, here's the anniversary of the Dundee murders. And here's another anniversary. So another anniversary. So 5 years go by. And then Mother's Day weekend of 2013, breaking news in Omaha once again. And again, in a nice part of town where these things just do not happen, especially a ghastly, grisly murder. More doctors turn up dead.
And the ironic thing is, who is the guy on the spot again? Derek Moyse. So he is a lot has happened. Even in the interim, he'd even left homicide for a while because of just how demanding it was in, being on call all the time. And, he had children of his own, as I said. So it was kind of very, difficult on his family. So he had actually left homicide for a while. Then he came back because he just missed that work too much. And so he had not long before returned to homicide. And sure enough, there are some piano movers show up at a house to move a piano on a Tuesday morning after Mother's Day. They find the door ajar. They see a gun clip sitting in the doorway, and they're like, something ain't right here. And they immediately back away and call the police. Officers go in and find another grisly scene. Homicide is called. And who is the first detective to walk in the door? Again, it's Derek Moyse.
Right.
And he walks in the front door, and he immediately starts seeing things that look kind of familiar to him. He sees, he does see that gun clip that's down in the doorway. He also notices other gun parts that are there kind of in the entryway of the home. That he recognized them immediately as kind of the spring for the cartridge of the gun, and he clearly a gun had broken apart. He could see, but in front of him is a body. He doesn't know who this victim is at this point. Police have not identified them yet, but there's a body of an older man. He can see he clearly had been shot, but he also notices something else familiar, knife wounds in the neck. And that's right in the entryway of the home. And then off to the living room in the left side, there is another body, an older woman. And Moyse can right away see that she was in the fight of her life. I mean, she was desperately fighting for her life. She had stab and knife wounds all over her hands and arms, where she had clearly been trying to fend off somebody with a knife, but she had eventually been subdued. And she also had the same telltale stab wounds in the neck that that had been typical of the murders 5 years earlier. So he's already has, alarms kind of going off in his head. And after he does his original walk through the house, he talks to another detective, and it's like, are you seeing what I'm seeing here? And not long afterward, word comes from downtown who the identity of the victims who lives in this house. And it's Dr. Roger Brumbach, who is from the pathology department of Creighton University, the same department that Dr. Bill Hunter had worked in. In fact, the detective who was in the main station, who did the real estate search and found the name, and then simply Google the name, who is Roger Brumbach, and found his profile on the Creighton Pathology website. She turned to another detective and immediately said, "He's back." Mm-hmm. They knew, and everyone in Omaha knew right away as soon as the news broke that there had been another set of murders involving the Creighton Pathology Department. Everyone in Omaha knew at that point, we're all armchair detectives, that there was a serial killer on the loose, and he was targeting Creighton University pathologists.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely bizarre to watch all this unfold. Just being a native Omaha guy, and I don't work for the newspaper. I'm reading the newspaper. I'm watching channels 3, 6, and 7, for this information, and it was scary because, like we said at the top of the show, there's not a lot of unsolved mysteries in murders in Omaha. It's almost always domestic or gang, things like that. But the brutality, once again, I mean, Dr. Brumbach, he was shot multiple times, and the knife in the neck. Was it he or his wife beaten over the head? I mean, the gun was broken because they were beaten with the gun. They were beaten so hard that the gun broke.
Yes. Derek Moyse, he was already piecing it together what happened immediately. And he used blood splatter evidence, and he pretty much knew exactly what had happened. And it does fit if you follow the evidence. So what did he deduce? That whoever this person was had come to the door, shot Dr. Brumbach. Then his wife obviously had heard the shots, had come to see what was going on. And Dr. Brumbach had been shot at close range, and he had clearly likely been struggling with the gunman, which is how the gun clip had come loose and fallen into the doorway. So now the assailant is there standing in the hallway. Mary is there too. He no longer has a functioning gun. So what does he do? He hits her in the head with it.
Right.
That's what causes the gun to break apart. She has the body, he can see, has a head wound as if she had been struck with a blunt object. And that's what he determines happened. His assumption is that once she was beaten in the head with this gun, that she had been stunned enough that the assailant then had time to work his way into the kitchen, find the knife drawer, pull out 2 knives again from the home. Then Mary had been stunned, but she was not unconscious. That's when he then tried to stab her and engaged where she was kind of desperately trying to fight him off. He eventually subdues her, and there was lots of blood evidence of that. And then he could see because in the case of where Mary was killed, there was blood everywhere. I mean, because it was flying all over the walls, and as she was trying to fight this guy off. But then there was also blood evidence, just drops that were falling straight off the knife. So after he killed Mary, he just very calmly walked over to where Roger was, and he could see by the blood splatters that were falling off the knife in nice round circles, walked over to where Roger was. He was probably already dead based on the gunshot wounds he had suffered. But just to make sure he was dead, he took the knife and he plunged it into Roger's neck in the exact same place that it had been plunged into the neck of the previous 3 victims. In fact, I should mention that all the autopsies on all 4 victims showed the same thing, that they all had their carotid arteries severed with these stabbings. And so whoever was doing this knew that, hey, if you're going to kill someone with a knife, that's a good place to do it.
Yeah, absolutely brutal and just lethal in the infliction of these wounds. So the police know now there's a serial killer. These people are being targeted. They don't know if there's a hit list. They don't know what's going on. So I'm a big fan of Police Chief Schmatter here in town. Todd Schmatter, I think he's done a really good job.
I think he's the best chief we've ever had in this town.
For as long as I've been alive. I'm 48 and I can name quite a few of them. I think and I'm a little biased because my mom was friends with his dad, Rich, who was a cop for years and years. Rich went to my church growing up. And so I knew Rich because he was friends with my mom, and he's just a good guy. And I think Chief Todd is doing a great job, but he's like, we cannot waste any time because this person is obviously a serial killer and he's going to kill again. If we don't stop him, somebody else is going to die.
Right. In fact, the police knew something at the time that we didn't know either, which was the very next day, or maybe it was the same day that I think it was the next day after the Brumbach killings, they get a phone call from another Creighton pathologist who says, oh, by the way, on Mother's Day, the same day that everyone thinks that the Brumbachs were killed, somebody tried to break into our home and our burglar alarm was tripped. And so the police knew that there was potentially, and the timing of it, they placed it basically right around, likely right before the Brumbach killings had occurred, because they knew a rough idea of the Brumbach killings because there had been neighbors who had heard the gunshots on that Sunday. They didn't report them because they didn't really think anything of it. There were no witnesses to it, but there were neighbors who definitely remembered hearing what could have been gunshots on that Sunday, and placing the time of the burglar alarm. It was about an hour before what things had gone down at the Brumbach house. And in fact, we in the media were hearing rumors of that too. Did not immediately confirm it, although eventually I did break the story where I was able to confirm that it was that there indeed had been an attempted break-in at the Butra house that very same day.
I'd just like to point out right now, people are like probably listening like, what do you mean you heard gunshots on Mother's Day and nobody did anything? Well, Omaha, like a lot of Midwestern cities in the summertime, is a little fireworks happy. You know what I mean? I mean, every year, and now we have them legal on New Year's Eve and Husker Saturdays or whatever it is. But I mean, like, it's not that unusual from May to August to hear on a Sunday or Saturday during the weekend somebody shooting off a firework, 2 or 3 of them, pop, pop, pop. You know, I mean, it's not that unusual here in Omaha.
And it also should be noted that in the Brumbach neighborhood, which was a little different than the Hunter neighborhood, the yards were much larger, very much more wooded. It was a more suburban type neighborhood. There really was no really close neighbor to that house that would have been able to even see the killer come and go.
Now, when you broke the news of the attempted break-in at Dr. Chandler Butra's house, I was jolted to attention because they live right over by Westside High School, where I went to high school. And I know their daughter.
No kidding.
She was in band with me. Mina is her name, and her little sister.
Omaha's a big small town.
Oh, for sure. And I've been to their house. Like they live over by Westside. There's times she was a grade or 2 younger than me, and I would give her a ride once in a while home from a band thing. Sometimes we'd rehearse on Monday nights. He's like, "Can I get a ride home?" I didn't. Sure, So I've driven up into their driveway and dropped Mina off. So I know exactly where that house is. I know exactly where the Hunters were killed, or Tommy and Shirley were killed. I know where the Brumbachs were killed. My aunt and uncle used to live out by that way. So, I mean, yeah, we are a big, small town. So it's weird. There's more connections that I have to this story that I'll reveal later. But so, like this is my hometown. and there's a serial killer on the loose, and he targeted somebody else. And as the investigation kind of unwinds, we find out that the Brumbacks are almost like a plan B.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We get to that point because you mentioned Schmatter. He does form a task force,
right?
And they put some of the best detectives in the Omaha Police Department on it, and including some from other agencies, and they're FBI agents on this and they know now they don't limit the investigation to the Creighton University angle. They continue to pursue all the other angles, and the Russian comes back and do it again because he actually calls up one of the detectives and
Right.
says, "You probably want to talk to me again, don't you?"
Right.
And and they didn't know what to think about this. It was like, is he just trying to mock us? He put himself kind of back into the crosshairs of the investigation, and because it almost had the feeling of a serial killer. It's like, you can't catch me. I'm mocking you and calling you up, and
right.
so they spent a lot more time on him again, and so the task force gets to work, and Moise is a part of it. And his initial assignment was looking into Mary and seeing if anybody had motive to kill her. And she was like the nicest, sweetest person, and all of her friends were all nice, sweet people. And he could just see this is going nowhere. And so he immediately, this time, since they knew there was a likely pathology connection, this time they collected all of the records of everyone who had ever worked in the Creighton Pathology Department since 2000, so like the previous 13 years. And they went there and they grabbed all the personnel records from the pathology department, and every person who had ever worked there was put into a binder, had the records put in a binder with their name on it. And so Moise, after spending almost a week on this, on that one angle, he gets handed a binder by his sergeant, and the name on the binder is Dr. Anthony Garcia. It's just another case of Derek Moise being the right man in the right time. It just kind of seemed to continue to happen in this case, because that binder could have been handed to anyone, but it was handed to him. And so he starts going through it, and he starts noticing some things. He sees that, Dr. Garcia had been in the pathology department clear back in 2000. In fact, they only went back to 2000 in the records. So if they had only gone to 2005 or whatever, they would not have found him. But they went back to 2000. They found that he had entered in the fall of 2000, and he pretty quickly sees that he had been fired from the pathology department, had had a lot of problems, had been a problem student, really kind of sophomoric when you look at some of the things that he did there. And they quickly see that he had a lot of problems with Beatra. He and Beatra had been feuding. She had been giving him bad reviews, and he had gotten angry about it, and he'd threatened to sue Creighton over the bad reviews that she was giving him. And then he finds the letter of termination that kicked Garcia out of the department, and he very quickly sees two names at the bottom signing this letter. Dr. Bill Hunter and Dr. Roger Brumback were the two signatories at the bottom of this letter. And he's like, this guy is pretty interesting. So then the next day he goes and he thinks, I need to learn more about this Garcia guy. And he sees that he's now living in Terre Haute, Indiana. He's a doctor there. And he has the Terre Haute police pull a bunch of information on him. And it includes his driving record, and it includes the record of all the cars that he owns. And one of the things he sees is that back in 5 years earlier, he had driven a Honda CR-V. And when he then had the motor vehicle department pull those records at the time he was living in Louisiana, it showed it was a silver Honda CR-V with a Louisiana plate. And all of a sudden, he became very, very interested in Dr. Anthony Garcia.
You would not see bigger red flags on the 50-yard line at a Husker football game than the red flags that started popping up, honestly, from the investigation. And I'd like to take a minute to talk about go back to the task force that they put together. So it's Derek Moyes, Detective Nick Herfert. He's kind of the technical expert. Scott Werner, Ryan Davis. They're all part of this special task force who had no other responsibilities. Like they are concentrating only on these cases, only on these murders to bring this killer to justice. So they take all these resources, all these man hours, and they are just pouring their lives into trying to figure out who the hell this is. And
right.
And lo and behold, all these red flags, all these check boxes start appearing. Motive, maybe some skill with a knife. I don't like to say it like that, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, knowledge how to be.
It was very ironic. Yeah, the one Butra gave him terrible reviews in everything. As a pathologist, you perform autopsies, right? And she gave him just generally terrible reviews for his knowledge and his ability to diagnose things. But she did give him high marks in one thing: cutting. He was good with a scalpel.
He's good with a scalpel, right? And he was fired. He was a real misfit. I mean, he wasn't just, like they had to. They fired him because of all kinds of things. I mean, I read in your book at one point when he was handling a body, he left it face down, so it deformed the face post mortem. Just total disregard for any kind of decorum. He got a coworker fired. No. He did a prank call, a terrible prank call while a guy was taking his board exam.
A very high stakes board exam that was going to determine whether he was going to be a pathologist or not. And he made a prank call to the man's wife, telling him he needed to report to work immediately or he would be fired in the midst of this exam.
Yeah.
And they very quickly traced it to him. In fact, that was the final straw. That was what finally made Creighton decide they needed to fire this guy. And so, you mentioned, in addition to Derek, there were Nick Herford and Ryan Davis. And that's what Derek said after he finds the silver CRV. He goes to his superior and he goes, "Hey, we really need to dig into this guy. I need Nick, I need Ryan, and I need you guys to leave us the heck alone." And so they stopped even going to the task force room. They went back up to homicide. They were normally partners in the homicide unit. So that's why he requested those two guys. They normally work very closely together. They went back up to the homicide room and they spent the next couple of months doing nothing but digging into Anthony Garcia. And they continued to find a lot. They had a couple of really big breaks. They took a while to find, but what Nick did was he became the records guy. So he started. They found that Garcia had been a doctor all over the country and had been in residency programs all over the country. And so Nick was the guy who was kind of digging into those records. And they just found that not only was he a misfit at Creighton, he had been kicked out of several pathology programs, including the one at LSU, including one in Chicago, including one in New York. But one thing Nick noticed that was, again, very striking to them is that when he had been kicked out of the pathology program at LSU, there's a reason he'd been kicked out. He'd been kicked out because he had failed to fully provide they discovered that his resume under which he'd been accepted in the program, he had omitted things, including the fact that he had been kicked out of the Creighton pathology program. And the person who confirmed that was Dr. Bill Hunter. And Dr. Bill Hunter confirmed that literally just days before the killings had happened in the Hunter house. And so it wasn't as if he had been kicked out of the pathology program in 2001 and he had just waited all those years to seek his revenge. It was something very much more immediate and approximate that had given him that motive to commit those crimes. And then the other big break they had was they found a cell phone number for him and they requested the cell phone records. And again, this was an area that Nick was kind of very, very skilled at. He was a digital forensics. That was his specialty. And when the cell phone records came back, they saw that on Mother's Day. Now the records didn't go back to the time of the Hunter killing, so they had no way of knowing what calls he had made around them. But they did have records for Mother's Day, which was just a couple months earlier, and they found that his phone on that day had only had one call on it. It was an incoming call. It was ironically from his mother. She was probably calling to have a Mother's Day conversation with her son. And when they geolocated the cell phone tower where that call had come in, it showed that it was in western Iowa, just literally about 50 miles east of Omaha. And about an hour after when they believed the killings had taken place in the Brumbach house. And Ryan Davis immediately said to the guys, "We got him." Right. They now had him. Not only did they know he had motive, but they now had placed him in the Omaha vicinity on the day the Brumbachs were killed. And then those phone records yielded yet another benefit, because they saw Nick's, or it was Ryan. No, it was Nick Herford started going through those records, and he saw that he had made Anthony Garcia had made some phone calls to Gander Mountain, and he knew that Gander Mountain was a sporting goods store, and he also knew that Gander Mountain sold guns.
Right.
And so he thought, I wonder if he could have bought a gun at Gander Mountain. And he goes and he makes a subpoena for Gander Mountain on any guns that may have been sold to Anthony Garcia. Sure enough, they find a gun of the exact make of the kind that had been used to kill Roger Brumbach, had been purchased by Dr. Garcia at Gander Mountain just weeks before the killing. So now not only do they have motive, not only do they have opportunity, but they have the means for the killing of Dr. Brumbach as well. So by that time, they know they have their guy. And they think it's time to go get him.
Right. This is what's so great about your book. I know we're going to be talking about this for a little bit while longer. And, an hour program, people are going to say, well, I know all about this case. No, I mean, you obviously are a newspaper reporter that's done all this work uncovering all this stuff, and you write it all out. And it's just such a great tale of 21st century police work. And you mentioned the great work that Detective Nick Herford did. And I mentioned I had another connection sort of to all this weirdness, is that I went to high school with Nick. And
it's a West Side grad.
Right. And you, I think somewhere in your book, he's kind of referred to as like the nerd detective, because he has all this great knowledge of, like you said, the computer forensics and tracking down all this, triangulation of the cell phone towers and all this digital receipts and trying to figure out where these pings are coming from and everything. Well, Nick was our senior class president. So he,
oh, no kidding.
For real. Right. Now we had it's a big school. I mean, like 400 or 500 people in my graduating class, but yeah, Nick wasn't a nerd, but I can see how his intelligence lent itself to this investigation and what he's doing now.
Put Nick in the West Side Hall of Fame, because he is, he literally, and I mean this, he's now retired, but he was there. He was as big an expert on digital forensics as anybody in the country. He had come into police work he worked in computers. Mm-hmm. He didn't even graduate from college. He basically started working in computers. Maybe he graduated from college. Maybe I shouldn't say that, because I can't remember. He didn't graduate from college, but he was in computer school. Mm-hmm. So he'd gone to a special computer school, and he found that he knew more about computers already than the instructor. And right. So, and then he worked in computers and then decided to go into police work. And so he just kind of naturally gravitated to this. And this happens after the arrest. But boy, when he gets his hand on Anthony Garcia's cell phone, I mean, the evidence that he pulls off that phone is really too much for us to even go into in a podcast. But let's just say that if you are committing a crime and you carry a cell phone, you are an idiot. And especially if you're committing a crime and you're using Google Maps and it says, Google Maps would like to use your current location. Is that okay? Don't hit yes, because Anthony Garcia basically placed himself in a parking lot in a restaurant where he literally Googled Roger Brumback's address before going immediately over the house to kill him. That is the level of detail that Nick was able to pull off of Anthony Garcia's phone. Just absolutely stunning abilities.
And people are like, this guy went to medical school and he somewhat graduated, but he's a total misfit professionally, but he did graduate from medical school. I mean, earlier I said like an eyewitness report stated that they thought they saw him kind of stumble. Anthony Garcia was a terrible, terrible alcoholic.
He was.
By all accounts, he was a horrible alcoholic. Throughout the book, you talk about when they searched his house after he was arrested, it was just a mess of beer cans, and he just bought a 30-pack before he did these murders. I mean, he was an absolute train wreck of a human being.
He was a pathetic figure, I found, as we kind of dug into him. He basically, he didn't even want to be a doctor. He wanted to fix cars, but his parents, he had a mom who was a nurse, and his father was very proud, and my son, the doctor, and so they really pushed him to go to medical school. He barely got through medical school, did so only with really a lot of help. And there was a reason he flunked out of all these residency programs. He was just not fit to be a doctor, but it's the path that had been laid for him. But it also doesn't say very much about our licensing of doctors. He was able to use his license to practice because he was a doctor. He didn't end up getting a specialty, which is what you really need to be a successful doctor. But he was still finding work, doing, checkups at work sites and shot clinics and stuff like that. He was still finding work to do as a doctor.
Ironically, in prison too.
Yes.
In prison. He did blood draws and things in prison too. So yeah, he was just really a pathetic existence. And a lot of this, just started coming out in trial, and it was uncovered by, your reporting, and it's certainly detailed in your book. So the police, they know they got this guy. They've got him dead to rights. I mean, they have him.
Well, they have him dead to rights on the Brumback case.
Correct.
Fortunately, on the Hunter case, they don't have nearly as much because they don't have cell phone evidence. Mm-hmm. They can't place him in the area. They all they have is the fact that he had been fired from the LSU program about the time that the Hunter killings took place. And then they have the similarities between the Hunter killings and the Brumback killings. In fact, that's why prosecutors, they tried all of them together because they said these are linked. And they knew that the best way to get a conviction in the Hunter cases is to use the correlation, killed in the same manner, use that evidence. Because since they had him nailed cold in the Brumback killings, use that to then also help convict him of the Hunter killings. And in many ways that did help, but they did, the star of the trial actually became someone who we haven't even spoken about yet.
Oh, I'm getting to that because it's certainly like this whole trial. So they go through and you detail with great detail. You describe in great detail, sorry, in your book, how they finally have the go ahead to make the arrest. So they place him under arrest and they bring him in. And then the trial is a whole nother thing, a whole nother part of this incredible story.
Unbelievable.
So at first he gets these lawyers from Chicago who really disrespect Omaha. They don't give a rat's rear end about anything in Omaha. So we've got our great Don Klein is prosecuting the case. And I know I wrote it down here. I forget her name. It's Brenda Beadle.
Brenda Beadle.
Right. She does a great job too. So Don Klein himself, like the chief prosecutor here in town, handles the case along with Brenda. And then Garcia's family, his defense team is the Mata family of attorneys from Chicago who just come in guns blazing, and they just like a scorched earth policy, or just
Right.
they just.
And the sad thing is the Garcia's family spent a lot of money to hire the Matas, who they literally had just plucked out of a phone book.
Oh God.
The sad thing is Omaha has one of the best public defenders in the country too, and Tom Riley, and he would have been so much better off represented by the public defender than they did mortgaging their entire family's lives, on to hire the Matas, and because the trial did not go well for them. But the star witness became this dancer.
Yeah, this adult entertainer.
Adult entertainer that after they arrested Garcia, they served some search warrants in Terre Haute, Indiana, where he was living, and they learned he liked to go to strip clubs. So they were like, we should go to these strip clubs, and they did, and everyone was telling them, you need to talk to Ryder. You need to talk to Ryder. And Ryder was the nickname or the stage name for Cecilia Hoffman. And it turns out that Anthony had kind of taken a liking to Cecilia and lavished her with lots of attention. And she kind of played along with it because, that's kind of what you do. The way you get all the tips in that business is by
he was a big spender too at the strip club.
Attracting these big spenders. But she eventually saw that he was getting too personal and that she needed to push him away. And she said, "Oh, Tony, you're a good guy. You're a doctor and I'm a bad girl." And he had said to her, "Oh, I'm not a good guy. I've killed people."
Right. In his drunken stupor at the strip club, trying to impress this. She's a cute kid, cute girl, right?
And so she became, and he said, "I didn't like doing it, but it was a boy and an old lady, and I feel bad about it." And so she became the star witness, a very reluctant star witness, because she did not want to testify, but she was put on the stand, and the Matas knew that she was absolutely the key to whether he was going to be convicted in the Hunter killings or not. So they went after her with everything and tried to make her look like a liar and a deceitful person. Oh, you were just leading Tony along because, that's what you dancers do. You deceive people, and you're deceiving people again here. And she was so strong on the stand. We can't even detail it all, but she was an amazing, amazing witness. And her testimony is and just that whole scene in the crime is worth the cost of the book itself, I think.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, and you do a great job in there too, because, it'd be really easy to say, like the defense team tried to do, it'd be really easy to dismiss her as being, well, she worked in a strip club, and how do you, but you did a great job of describing, like you just said, how strong she came into the courtroom, how she didn't waver in her story. She delivered it honestly. She just kind of stated the facts and let the jury decide.
Very credible. She came off as a very sympathetic person. She basically said, "Hey, I'm not proud of it. I worked as a dancer. It was a bad time in my life. I've moved beyond that." And she came off as a very sympathetic character, especially when the Matas went after her and made her cry on the stand.
Yeah.
The jury actually reacted very negatively to what had happened there.
Yeah. Let's talk about the jury. The jury comes back in almost O.J. Simpson trial speed. I mean, it was less than a day. It was like 7 hours. They came back and
considering
guilty.
there were 4 homicides here that we were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So 5 years in between the murders. It took 3 years for it to approximately to go to trial. So we're talking, this is it was
drawn out
and horrible for Omaha. Nothing. There's, we're laughing about little things here and there and whatnot, and you almost have to, just because of the absurdity of a lot of these things that happen with this case. But man, 8 years Omaha had to deal with this terrible scourge. And then there was another 2 years or so
before he was the sentencing.
So we had to live with this for 10 years or so. And
Yeah.
you were right there covering it and, for the hometown paper. And I mean, what was it like sitting in the courtroom, hearing all this? And
it was amazing. And I went into the courtroom. I was helping out our regular court reporters and police reporters. This is a huge trial. I mean, it was the biggest, literally. I don't think it's a exaggeration to say that this was the biggest court spectacle in Nebraska since Charles Starkweather. I mean, there just had been no bigger criminal trial in that time, and so no huge media attention. National media were there. Absolutely, just an incredible spectacle. And I was there because I knew I wanted to write a narrative. I knew I wanted to. In fact, I had already kind of sketched out a narrative. And I had struck a deal with the police chief on the day that Garcia was arrested. They had the press conference. I followed Chief Schmatter back to his office, and I knew him a little bit. And I just said, "Hey, Chief," I was trying to pump him for more information. Something that just exclusively I could get. Didn't get a lot out of him, but I basically said at that day, I said, "Chief, this is obviously an amazing case. I think it would make an amazing story to tell how you guys cracked the case. I just wondered if when this case finally ends." Now, who knew when I was having that conversation that we were talking, it would be more than 3 years before this would happen. But I said, when this case is finally resolved, I would love to sit down with the detectives that cracked this case. And he said, "Henry," he knew all the details. And he said, "I think it would be an amazing case. And absolutely, we can make that happen." He kept his word. After that trial ended, I sat down and spent hours with Derek Moyes. I think I interviewed Derek alone for 6 or 7 hours.
Wow.
And I interviewed Ryan and Nick and absolutely. And once I started writing it, I knew that there was more than I could ever put in a newspaper story. That's when I said, this is really a book. Because just not only as we mentioned, are the victim stories very compelling, the detectives and the work that they did is also just incredibly compelling.
Yeah, I know. Every time we come up on this anniversary of these crimes, being an Omaha guy, I knew I wanted to cover this somehow on my show, but I wanted to do it the right way. And reading your book and talking to you, I just knew you handled it right. Like as a reporter that had love for the hometown, had respect for the victims, had respect for the police department, and a respect for getting the story out responsibly. And so it wasn't sensationalistic. It was a very compelling read. And for you to spend this time with me, I was super excited that you were able to, sit down and chat with me. It's a great book.
Yeah. I hope people are compelled to read it. It's again called Pathological. It was published by Wild Blue Press, and I know it's still available online.
Yeah, I got the e-version. I'll have to hit you up. I'll get an imprint copy. I'd love to have you sign a copy of it to put in my library for sure. It's like I said, for being an Omaha guy, thankfully, we don't have a lot of these kinds of stories. And when we do, it's important to remember the victims and to, commemorate the hard work that the police department does, because it was not an easy job at all for those gentlemen.
Yeah, totally agree.
Henry, thanks so much for being a part of the show. I really enjoyed talking to you. Pathological, the murderous rage of Dr. Anthony Garcia. Henry, if I see you out and about around town, I'll buy you a drink or something.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Brian.
You bet. There we go, everybody. Henry J. Cordes, Pathological, Dr. Anthony Garcia. Unbelievable. Great book. All right, more crazy stuff from Omaha on the next episode of Necronomicast, episode 255. Retired police officer for this great city, Brian Bogdanoff. He's written a book called 3 Bodies Burning, and he'll tell you what that means. We're also joined, now this next episode, we did it live in the studio. No Zoom, none of that crazy stuff. We did it live like God intended. We're talking face to face, and then we decided to pull out the phone and call somebody who was criminally involved with the disposal of these 3 bodies that were burning. It is an episode that is not to be missed. So coming up in October, we have Historic Haunted Heartland 2, The Spirits Speak, with Cindy Keza, John E.L. Tenney, and this saxophone player right here, Andrew Vogt. It's a big 2023 here at Necronomicast. Hope you're having a great night and a great life. Thank you for listening. Now go get some sleep. Andrew Vogt, everybody. Pathological.